Nehemiah. We're going to look at chapters 3 and chapter 4, Lord willing, tonight. Now, remember who Nehemiah is. He's a cupbearer. We saw that in chapter 1, right? And what's neat about Nehemiah, at least in my mind, is he's not a church person. And let me explain what I mean about that. You look at Ezra. Ezra is a church person. He is in line to be the high priest. In fact, some people think he was a high priest. You look a little bit earlier, you see Jeshua, who is another high priest, Zerubbabel, who is a prince of the line of David. And so you go through that list, you see all these church people. Remember, we start off with Zerubbabel in chapter 1. In chapter 6 of Ezra, we saw Ezra. Now we're in Nehemiah. With this that we're looking at, about 80 years after the beginning of the book of Ezra. But Nehemiah is a government official. He's just a guy who kind of works for a living, but God's using him to accomplish as much as the other people. And there's sometimes in the church, and if you go into some denominations and some, especially a classic or old line church, as they may say, you have your clergy laity system where some people think, well, okay, it's only the pastor, only the priest who's allowed to give communion or Lord's Supper. It's only the preacher who's allowed to do this or that or whatever else. And the way the biblical model is all of us are priests, aren't we? We all have a role to play in the Lord's church. We all have a part. And so there is place for officers. You have elders, that's an office. Deacons, that's an office. You see ministers and preachers in the scriptures. But what you see, what I like when I go through Nehemiah is how we see everybody working together, whether you're a Levite or a high priest. We're going to see those guys in chapter 3. Or whether you're just, I think we're going to run across some guys. They are perfume makers. They are potters. They've got different jobs. And it's just interesting. Here they are. They're out there building the wall just like everybody else. So I like that. All right, so as you get in Nehemiah, Ezra made sense maybe a little bit more. You got to build an altar if you're going to bring everybody back and, worship. You can't sacrifice a sheep and a bull if you don't have an altar. So that's the first thing they built. Well, yeah, and you got to build a temple. You got to have the holy place and most holy place. You got to have the place that covers the altar and, follows the plan of God to show God's presence there. So that makes sense as well. In my mind, you think, okay, a wall. But what's the big deal about a wall, and why do we care about it so much? Why is that such a deal when you go through this book? All right, so in the first part of Nehemiah, you're building the literal wall. In the second part of Nehemiah, as a matter of fact, starting in the very next chapter, and then we'll skip a chapter and then start it again, you're building a figurative wall. And this literal wall has a couple purposes. First of all, it protects the city. If an army comes up, if the thieves come up, if your neighbors hate you and threaten you, which they're about to do in the next chapter, it gives you a wall. You've got protection, which is there. So that's a huge deal. Secondly, it gives you city identity. It lets you know where the city starts, where the city stops. A corresponding thing, if you go to Chicago, you recognize Chicago by the skyline, right? You've seen the picture of Chicago and the skyline, the Sears Tower that's there. You go to Dallas. I grew up close to Dallas. I recognize Dallas by the skyline. You go to New York, of course, with the Trade Center, you recognize that skyline, which is there. And in the same way, in the ancient world, a city is identified by its wall. It's the skyline of the ancient world. And so you needed a wall if you're going to be somebody. You needed that wall to show the identity of the city, which you had. Thirdly, it's a place to gather. You read in Psalm 1 about, blessed are those who sit next to the wise, sit next to the good. You read the book of Ruth. You get to chapter 4 of Ruth. You see Boaz meets with the elders. Well, where do the elders hang out? At the city gate. This is where city business is done. City council is what we think of today. Nowadays, we do it in the courthouse. Back then, they did it at the city gate. Now, why are all these old guys hanging out at the gate? Well, it's more than, the guys today who show up different places to drink coffee. You're going to identify who's coming in and coming out. and you're going to be able to answer questions as people are coming in and out, whether they should be there or not. And that's what leads us to our third one. It allows you to control who's in your city. And this is a big deal. You need to know who is inside, who is outside. You need to know what's going on. A little bit later in the book of Nehemiah, we're going to find out that even though they pass all the laws again about the Sabbath, there's a lot of people sneaking into the city, sneaking in the back gate, and they're selling stuff on sale on Saturday, on the Sabbath, so they can sell their stuff against the law. And so Nehemiah has to make sure those gates are closed and that people are watching to keep people from breaking the law. And so you need this wall to keep out thieves and to keep out people who are going to break the rules. It lets you have security and control, which is there. And so as you run through the book of Nehemiah, it's about that wall. Build that wall. Now, secondarily, what you're going to see is we talk about it in a symbolic way later, as we see that the Jews have walls within themselves. And chapter 5, we're going to see where the rich are taking advantage of the poor. A little bit later, we're going to see where that wall is not working because Tobiah is actually going to be living in the temple when Nehemiah comes back. And you see where they're breaking down this wall and they're building walls and they're trying to get these walls all in the right place. So it starts off with the literal, ends up with the symbolic. There's a lot of stuff to look at that, and it's super interesting. All right, so there's your wall stuff. Now, here we go, chapter 3. What in the world can you learn from all of these names? There's 45 gates, towers, and names mentioned on this wall. And you run down this list, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is like a genealogy which is here, isn't it? And we could spend some time playing with this. First thing I want us to notice is the city is a whole lot smaller. It's about 1/4 the size as it was in Solomon's day. If you are looking at that picture that is on the screen, that is on the far right of the city. And about 3 times that size would be in the left side, which they did not wall in. Part of it's ruins. Part of it is it just would have been too expensive to build some of this wall and such. And so this is the walled city of Nehemiah's time. It's going to grow quite a bit when Herod redoes it. It's going to grow quite a bit even in later days, and especially today, it's dwarfed. Of course, modern Jerusalem doesn't have a wall like this, but it's going to be dwarfed as you go across. If you've ever been to Israel, that square in the top, which would be much larger and be much closer to the sheep gate, that's where the temple is. So the temple's on the northern side, which is there. Now, I've got numbers on the orange, and those correspond to those red numbers. And we're going to kind of fly through this because I don't want to lose everybody. And so we're going to look at some of the big events going on as you and I run around this wall and check it out. And number 1 is at the very top on the right side. It's the sheep gate. And you can see that in your little handout sheet if that's a little bit easier for you to see. I don't think the numbers are there. But you got your sheep gate. And the sheep gate is right next to the temple. And that's the very first thing that Nehemiah pulls out when you're going through here. Probably Ezra wrote the book, but Nehemiah and Ezra start at the sheep gate, and we're going to go counterclockwise as we check out this city and we see everybody who's building. Now, why are they building? Chapter 2 and verse 18, Nehemiah had said, let's rise and build. Let's get going. And so everybody is started, and here we go. 45 sections of wall, towers, and gates. Why so many gates? There's a whole lot of roads coming in here. This used to be a major city. As soon as these walls get up, it's going to be a major city again. That's going to be a big deal here in a little bit. All right, so what's number 1? Eliashib. I call him Eliashib. It may be something different in your translations because the Hebrew is kind of tough coming across there. He is the high priest, and he and his family build the sheep gate, build the towers on either side of the sheep gate, and they consecrate it. They pray over it, sacrifice over it. This is the holy gate. And so it's right next to the temple. And since it's called the sheep gate, we figure when they were bringing in the sacrifices, this is the gate they came through. So this is the religious center of the city of what is going on. And so it's pretty neat seeing that. He's the grandson of Jeshua. which we see in chapter 1 is the first high priest, which is brought back. So this is number 3 in our line of high priest of the return, which has come back. Now, why does he start with the high priest, you think? Any idea? Okay, yeah, there's your example. All right. It is good for the leadership to get their hands dirty. It's good for the leadership to get their hands dirty. Sometimes leadership tends to want to be in a supervisor role, and this is their main, the main thing what their hands do. And so it's good that the leaders get their hands dirty and that you see them working just like you see everybody else working. That's a very important thing. As a leader, it's not good to tell people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. And so that's one of the classic things. If you're the boss of a company, you need to be willing to clean toilets and throw out the trash just like anyone else if that company's going to be successful. That's kind of the thought process there. And so he starts off with the high priest and his family, first of all, to emphasize this is a holy gate, this has been consecrated, this is going on, but it's important to get your hands dirty. It's important for this work to go on and to make sure this area is concentrated as you go along. Now, the next one I want us to notice is the number 2 there, and that's the people of Tekoa, okay? That's chapter 3 and verse 5. Now, we'll run into the Tekoites, or Tekoacans, or the Tekoanese. I don't know how you do that. We'll run into them here a little bit later in the chapter. But the Tekoites are from a small town outside of Jerusalem, and they come and they start helping, and they start taking care of this wall that's on this northeast. I'm thinking it's the northeast side. And so they're building along, but what's it say, if you got your Bibles open, chapter 3, verse 5, about the nobles and the important people of Tekoa? Oh, they didn't want to do it. They did not work. And it depends on your translation of newer, older translation, and it's not very clear in the original. Some translations, newer translations, say the nobles did not want to put their shoulder to this work and serve the Lord. Yeah, okay? In other words, they didn't want to get those calluses going on, right? Older translations and some other translations say they would not come because they did not want to serve the leader. In other words, they were not going to follow Nehemiah. Nehemiah was not going to be their king, their leader, their ruler. Whichever it is, the Tekoites, Tekoanese, whatever they are, they come and they work, but the leadership stays home. Well, sometimes you're going to find yourself in a situation where the people that you work with are loafing and not doing anything. And what do you do when that happens? You work anyway, right? You do your job, you work anyway. Sometimes at church, you may get the feeling, I don't see this happen very often at this congregation, but sometimes at church you look around and it doesn't feel like people are doing what you think they ought to be doing, all right? Is it in the Bible that there has to be a program and a bulletin for you to fill a service? No, okay? They have a mind to work, and so when they saw a need, they went and did it. Their nobles, the people who led the city of Tekoa, may not have wanted to go. They saw a need, they loved the Lord, and they loved their people, and so they went and they did the work. That's a huge lesson right there. All right, you go a little bit later, and I wish I would have written it down. Look at verse 8, and I just like this, okay? Next to him, we're still on this wall here. So we're still somewhere on this wall. It's not told exactly where we're at. Okay, next to him, Uzziel, the son of Hananiah, one of the goldsmiths, made a repair. So you got a jeweler here, okay? Next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, is working, okay? So you have a guy who makes jewelry and another guy who makes perfume, all right? Now, if the army attacks the wall, that's probably not the part of the wall I want to be behind. How much can a jeweler and how much can a perfumer, build a wall? And if anybody here is a jeweler or perfumer, I apologize. But, it's interesting here as Nehemiah is coming through here, he makes the point, it's not the bricklayers, or it's not only bricklayers, it's not only soldiers, it's not only the people who are used to doing manual labor that are doing this, it's everybody. Everybody is taking part in this. Everybody is participating. Everybody sees the need. And when Nehemiah says, let's get to this work, chapter 2, verse 18, rise up and build. Hey, you make perfume, you make jewelry, we'll figure out a way to use you. We'll figure out a way to get you involved and to get you working. All right, is there a lesson there with the church? Absolutely. Absolutely. We need every single person participating, every single person working. Illustration, of course, 1 Corinthians 12, the body of Christ. It talks about how some people, not everybody's the eye, right? Not everybody's the hand, okay? But every part of the body needs to be active, otherwise you have got problems. 3 verse 12, okay? We keep heading down this area here. That's number 4 on your list. You got Shalom, and Shalom is working with his daughters, okay? In this culture and time, this is kind of unusual. You don't see a lot of female bricklayers necessarily. If you go out on construction work, you don't see a lot of ladies who are doing construction work. It's not a common thing, at least in our country it's not. You go to Europe, you see a lot more of it. Here, not so much. Well, they're making a point. Everybody's participating. Everybody's working because he says, hey, this guy's here with his daughters, and they build a section of the wall. They're going along building this wall as well. All right. Now, number 5, we have rounded down the bottom. We've passed the refuse gate. That's at the very bottom. We've worked our way up. Number 5 is on that hill that's in the middle. You see that Ophel? That's a hill. And if you go down, see where that curve is, that crescent? That is the Kidron Valley. And so you'll hear about the Kidron Valley at certain times or whatever. You go down south, that is the Gehenna Valley, where we get some of our thought process about hell and what hell will be like when you go through there and see all that Gehenna Valley, which is there. But over the right, you see the Kidron Valley, and it's going up the Ophel Hill. Number 5, you've got some people building. Once again, chapter 3 and verse 27. And who is this? The people of Tekoa. So they have built their wall without their nobles, and they just go right across town, and they start building over there as well. And so they are really getting after it, really getting after it. Now, as you go from the bottom and you work your way up, and you pass the Tekoites there at number 5, and I've written it down as number 6, but actually it covers much of that side. What you'll notice if you read through this chapter slowly, Nehemiah has people building the wall in front of their house. If your house is here, you build the wall right in front of you. You build the wall right in your area. And there's a lot of Levites living over here, a lot of religious people living over here just south of the temple. And the focus is you do your work at your place, at your house. That's where you're going to start working. Once again, we say, well, why would we do that? All right, well, first of all, not a lot of travel. You know, hey, you save on, I don't guess they used gas back then. You save on the oats that you'd give your horse, right? Save on the mileage, which is there. More importantly, if something is at your house, how are you going to treat it? Especially if it's a defensive mechanism that's going to keep opposing armies from coming in and carrying you into slavery. You're going to do absolutely the best job you can do. Haggai got mad at these people because they were paneling their houses with the wood from Lebanon that they were supposed to be using on the temple. All right, so these guys like their houses. That's an obviously big thing there. And so Nehemiah said, build in front of your house. And so, I mean, they are getting after it. You're going to build the best that you can. There's a lot of civic pride, which is there. People for generations are going to see exactly what you built. And as Sam had said earlier in our little devotional, when you got married, you lived in your father's house. I leaned over to Rhonda and I said, I'm glad we're not in that culture. right? What's the Bible say? You cleave, you leave, right? Okay, well, anyway. Well, back then, that was going to be your area where your kids and your grandkids grew up. And so that's an important thing which was there. And so as you go around a city, yes, sir, Jerry? Oh, how tall and how wide? Oh, man, asking us questions that I have no idea. Here's what I know, okay? Yeah, right. What I know is that when we finish this chapter, everything is halfway built, which is about shoulder high. We've got the foundation on it, but we're not yet built. That's not going to happen until chapter 3, 4, 6. It'll happen in chapter 6. We're going to have the place built. What I know is if you're looking at your thing, around there, number 1, the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hamani. And if you look down at the great projecting tower, each one of those is well over 100 feet tall. Now, I've not found a lot saying the height of the tower necessarily. I know that the wall widens around every gate up to 10 feet so that people can stand at the edge by the gate and defend the gate, throwing stones and whatever else they would throw at the people as they would come and such as that. And I also know from what I understand in the 60s, they were able to do some excavation on this area in the southeast, and they found that the wall was really lower quality than Solomon's wall and then some of the later walls, because part of it is you don't have professionals making it, and part of it is these people don't have a lot of money at the time. And so the wall is not of a great quality. It tends to be anywhere between 10 and 20 feet tall. And so there's some areas shorter, some areas taller, some areas which matter more or less because of the quality of the people who are building it and who are working on it. Is there a significance? Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you. You're giving me an opportunity to nerd out here. All right. You got the fish gate, right? That's in the top left. That is on the road going to Tyre. So that is where if you bought fish, the fish would be coming in. You've got the sheep gate where they brought in the sheep as far as how that would go. As you go around, you're going to have your dung gate. And that's where they threw out the trash. And so, there's a lot of mention of when Jesus is talking about this sort of thing, of Gehenna. We talked about that there before. Many times they would kind of point out to that area because it was always on fire, always smoking. And so it worked as a good object lesson that we don't catch sometimes as we're coming through. As you come around this water gate and such, you see some areas. I think the Pool of Bethesda is up in the north, if I'm not mistaken, by the sheep gate, but I'm not sure about that. And so I'm not sure about the horse gate. If I'm not mistaken, that's where the king used to come in and out. If you look on your little chart there, and you might be able to see it on here that I have, that little red that you see swinging around the south, that's the footpath that Nehemiah took. Nehemiah didn't bother at all about the north because when the Babylonians came in, they just wiped that out. So obviously all that was going to be gone. The southern part had some major issues, and when he swung up on the right-hand side of the bottom, remember, he could no longer ride his horse because there was so much rubble. Nobody had ever cleaned it up down this valley, and so there was so much rubble, he had to get off his horse because it was dangerous to his horse, and he had to walk through this area. And that's going to matter to us here in just a few verses as we run across that. But as a great philosopher, Forrest Gump said, that's all I know about that. I don't know. Anybody have a comment or anything? Yeah, what you got, Ethan? The King's Garden's hanging out right there near the dung gate. They didn't have to work so hard for compost that way, maybe. But yeah, and I just said Siloam Pool. I didn't know where it was, and it's on here. Hello, Siloam Pool. Yeah, it's right next to the King's Garden, which is there. But yeah, it's pretty good to have the King's Garden right next to the Gatung's Gate. Yes, ma'am, Marilyn? I think so. Refuse, trash, dung, all those wonderful things.
Too close to the garden anyway.
Yes, it is too close to the garden, says our says our physician's assistant who knows that stuff. All right, that's true.
You know, I get
Yeah. What Val just mentioned was, imagine the mess with the stones and a rock everywhere. Did they use the rock? Did they not use the rock? You got so much weight of stuff you've got to push away, and then you've got to bring in new supplies if you're not going to reuse it. And we'll get to that here in just a second too, where somebody's making fun of them about reusing everything. And it wasn't just going out there and sticking some Legos together. It was a massive work when you are poor. You know, these are refugees coming back from exile. It's a massive job, and everybody's putting their hand to it and doing the best, absolute best that they can with everything that's going on. All right, now turn to chapter 4. Chapter 4, we meet the bad guys. Hello, bad guys. All right, Sanballat. Sanballat hears that they're building the wall, and he is, verse 1, not happy at all. He is the governor of Samaria. If you recall, that is the area where the northern kingdom is. And real quick reminder on that. The northern kingdom, King Sargon of the king which destroyed that area, he carried everybody into captivity. His idea was, you can't be patriotic if you're not home. And so if you lived here, he took you captive and he took you to Iran or to Egypt or to Greece, or he sent you as far away as you could. And if you're a refugee, you're not going to know the language of anybody. You can't rebel because you're not comfortable where you are. And so his idea was just scatter everybody, and that keeps them from rebelling against you and put you in a great place. So there's some Jews who are left behind, those who are lame, those who really you don't want to take anywhere. You're just like, okay, you can stay here. Some Jews stay, and then you have these people from all the other places in the world show up here, and they intermarry with these Jewish people. And so they're about a third Jewish. A few of them might be half Jewish. And so they kind of follow God, and they kind of follow what the northern nation was doing with their Baal and Ashtoreth. And then they're also kind of following, you know, all these other gods too. And so there's a lot of weird theories and weird ideas that are coming. That's why when you get to John 4, I think it's 4:9, the Samaritan lady says, hey, Jesus, remember, Jews and Samaritans, we don't talk to each other. And that's the reason why she has these crazy ideas. You know, hey, Moses went to Sinai. I bet he stopped by Gerizim. That's this mountain we have over here, and our religion has decided to change the name, so we just pretend about Gerizim. What do you think about that, Jesus? All right, so you see a lot of these weird ideas. Sanballat's the governor of these people. And now the Jews are back. The Jews won't let the Samaritans rebuild. And you and I, in today's taste, would say, well, these guys are racist, you know, saying only Jews can do it. But the Jews are trying to follow their Bible, and they're trying to stay with the law of Moses. They're trying to keep this lineage clear that's going down to the days of Jesus, because Jesus can't be Jesus if you don't have this lineage. And so because of that, they don't want to intermarry with the Samaritans. They don't want to spend time with the Samaritans. They don't want to follow the gods of the Samaritans. And so Samaritans and Jews hate each other. Now here you have the governor of the Samaritans, and he is not happy about this wall being built. We saw all the gates in this city. So if this city gets back on its feet, all the commerce is going to go through this city, Jerusalem. All the money is going to go through this area again. And he knows that he's the governor of the northern place, and he's going to lose money. He's going to lose power. You've got the king's right-hand man, the cupbearer, who is the governor of this city. It's not good. It's not good for Samaritans. And so he is not happy at all. It's a threat to his people because of reputation, commerce, and the Jews always like to expand, okay? So he's going to make fun of them, he's going to threaten them, and he's going to bluff, and we'll see that coming along. So you see, first of all, this quote here, in the beginning of chapter 4, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they really offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive stones from the heaps of rubbish? And these stones have been burned. All right? Working with limestone, the Babylonians burned the limestone, which makes it turn into dust. And so you can't really reuse a lot of these bricks because if you put them up, they're just going to fall right over and just crumble and fall apart. And so Sanballat's pretty sarcastic. These guys are not bricklayers. They have no money. What do they think they're going to do? This is not going to work. Are they really going to build this as quick as they act like they're going to build it later? The answer is yes, 46 days. But he's kind of making fun of them. And he's like, they're using material which won't work, and it would just fall right over. And so Tobiah, another one of the bad guys, the Ammonite, I love how he says it because it reminds me of half the stuff I build. If a fox hops on top of the wall, it's falling over. Okay? All right. You ever build something and you're like, don't touch it. It's going to fall over. Please don't touch it. Just look. Well, Tobias says, hey, that is what your wall looks like. You don't have to worry about the Babylonian and the Persian army. If a wind comes, it's out of here. It's falling apart. And so they're sitting here making fun of the people. And what you're going to notice, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, things are great. They got a mind to work. They're putting their heart into this. Everything is great. And soon as these people start talking about, hey, this wall's never going to work. A fox is going to knock it over. You have no hope. It goes downhill. The Jews listen, and here in a few seconds, minutes, the way I'm going, you're going to see them to just start, saying, there's too much rubble. I'm scared of what's going to happen. I don't know what I'm doing. And you see everything fall apart. And what I want you to notice with this, defeated people are always easy to defeat. There's a lot of times when we bring this into the sports world. If you got a team that's used to getting beat, more likely than not, when they get out on the court, they're going to get beat. And there's a lot of teams that you can start, and it goes well for the first minute or two, and then they think, oh, here we go again. And there's a lot of people that have come from pretty dark places, and they finally get sober, they finally get straight, they finally get right, and one hiccup, and they're right back there. And so what we see working with Nehemiah is not this easy, hey, rah, rah, let's go. It's I've got broken people that I've got to put together. And so he's building more than a wall. He's building people. And this is hard. It's a lot harder to build people than it is to build a wall. And it's a lot harder to get these guys back into confidence when these people are here just hurting them. And these people are just coming. So you got a lot of bad guys. Sanballat the Samaritan, Tobiah the Ammonite. You got Arabs, Ammonites, men of Ashdod, which is interesting. Used to be a Philistine city. Now is a city full of all sorts of different races. But the point that Nehemiah is making is all around Jerusalem, nobody likes them. And everybody is saying, you build a city, we're going to come and conquer it. We're going to come and destroy it. And we're going to come and just tear it down. So how do you get defeated people back on track? When somebody's destroyed, what do you do? And we'll move fairly quickly because I'm running out of time. How do you get them back? Well, the prayer. You always start with prayer. Remember last week we talked about Nehemiah as a book of prayer. Now, this prayer is very different than the prayers you hear in church today, hopefully. He says, Lord, we have been in captivity for 70 years. Lord, please put these people in captivity for 70 years. Whew, that's some kind of prayer right there, isn't it? But he prays to God. He gives his problems to God. And then he listens to the people. And as you read about that listening to the people, verse 10 through 12, they're tired. There's a lot of rubble everywhere that makes the work difficult. They're afraid they're about to be attacked. He doesn't say, y'all get over it. He listens. He listens to what they're doing. And then he does what he can to, he reminds them of their reason. He makes sure that their heart is in it. He makes sure, don't be afraid of them. Verse 14, remember the Lord who is great and awesome and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Then he provides a plan. He sets a guard in front of the wall while they build. He's got to go a little deeper. So then he sets one guy who guards and one guy who works. And then he goes a little deeper. He makes it where a guy is holding a weapon in one hand while he's working with his hand with the other. And so they're going along and they're able to have some confidence because they're able to realize that they're working. He says even when they go get water, that's probably a euphemism to go to the restroom, but it may be just to take a break. They have to take their weapons with them. And so the whole time they have people who are guarding, people who are working. He says, I'm going to blow a horn. If somebody attacks, blow a horn. And when you hear the horn, we're all going to go to that area and defend a wall. So you're not alone. You are not alone. We're going to work together. Now, that'll preach in a church right there, won't it? Rather your prayer not be, hey, send them into captivity. But when you're a defeated church, you pray, you listen, recognize what the problems are. You remind them you're a child of God, and God's children always win. And then you meet those needs that they've got. You meet those needs that are there and work with them. All right. Application, we've covered most of these. Elisha began to work. Leaders need to get their hands dirty. Don't ask somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself. Every one of us need to get our hands dirty. Calluses are pretty good things. Number 2, it's absolutely amazing what happens when everyone is willing to work. Okay? What's the saying? Many hands lighten a heavy load, right? Okay? When everybody in the church is working, it's amazing how wonderful the church works. Now, we have the parrot principle. The Italian man came up, he did not like capitalism. And so he came up with the 80-20 rule. And here in America, we use the parrot rule for everything but capitalism. According to Parrott, anytime if you leave a system, a capitalistic system, go for 50 years, 80% of the wealth ends up in 20% of the hands. Okay? Now, we don't talk that way anymore. In the church, we always say, hey, look, 90% of the people sit around, 10% of the people are actually working. Or 20% of the people are actually working. When everybody's together, it's amazing what we can do. Number 3, all who wish to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. All right? If you've not yet faced trauma, guess what? Someday you will. And if you don't face opposition because of your faith, maybe your faith is not where it needs to be. Maybe you're not a strong enough Christian. You will face opposition. And when that opposition comes, trust God, continue to be faithful. Number 4, when Nehemiah saw problems, he didn't just ignore them. He didn't dismiss them. He didn't tell people to get over it. When he saw problems, he prayed, he encouraged, and he provided protection. That's a good lesson for us. And number 5, I think is important, especially in a church. The church is full of good people. Okay? The church is full of good people. And the vast majority of the people, if you give them opportunity, the vast majority of the people, if you give them a reason, they will work hard. One of the reasons why we have Christians that lack and don't do a lot is they don't see what they can do. They don't see a place that they can fill in. The church is full of good people. They just need direction. They need organization. They need help in this stuff that they do. All right, any questions? Yes, sir. What you got, Rick?
Controversial comment.
Oh, yeah, that's what we want to end with. Controversial comment, and then the bell will ring. All right, what you got? Especially on my Facebook.
I understand the points here and the points on your previous
Yeah.
slide. So if all of that is true, why is the church not growing any faster than it is?
Good stuff. Okay, he says, okay, all this stuff is true. Thank you. All right, so if this is all true, why isn't the church today growing the way that it did in the first century? The way that it should, okay? You got culture, okay? I think that's one of the things holding us back. Secondly, perhaps we're not as convicted as we should. You know, are you really spreading the gospel? Do you really feel comfortable telling other people about Jesus when you suffer? Do you rejoice because you've been found worthy to suffer for the name? And we've got to get that across. But a lot of that, I think, is not the fault of the people. We need to create a vision. We need to show people and equip people to do that work. What is it that you do when you get out of that water? You know, what is it that we expect a fellow that's sitting in the pew right here to do? How do you express Christ in your daily life? And that's something we've got to figure out and something we need to communicate as well. And that's a whole bag of worms, but we've run out of time.